Hello, welcome to The Art of It All. I am Stephen Leinard. My guest today is the indefatigable Jamal Sarakoki. Welcome, Jamal.
Glad you're here. Thanks for having me.
We know each other through New York and then down the coast to Florida, and but you're a native Chicagoan.
I am, born and raised.
Oak Park?
Actually, right in the city.
Right in the city.
Mm-hmm.
Is the hospital still standing?
Not really.
Never.
What is?
What is? I've driven down a couple of highways with people, and it's like, oh yeah, that building. I think that's where so was born. It's just covered in whatever. So
yep.
But looks like they're taking the new Rush Hospital.
Yes.
And turning it into something else. The old Rush Hospital turning it into something new. So
no, it's all different. I mean, driving through. I lived in the Austin area.
Okay.
So driving through even like Oak Park, Forest Park, I don't recognize anything.
Right.
It's all new.
So you are home for a couple of days doing a conference, but you're based in Florida now. Mm-hmm. But let's sort of rewind. So growing up in Chicago, tell me a little bit about the upbringing, why music, how you've sort of arrived at the.
Well, my mom. Let me start with my grandmother, actually.
Okay.
My grandmother was a musician. She never got to where she wanted to be.
Okay.
And she was actually taking some Bible and music classes at Moody the day that Dr. King was shot, actually. So she has.
If there's an answer to the "Do you remember where you were?" question, that's a heavy one.
Yeah. And so she had a home organ and a home piano, and she wanted her daughters to take up music, and some of them did, but most of them didn't. And so I grew up listening to my grandmother sitting in her living room playing hymns on the organ and singing to herself. And so my mom enrolled me at Sherwood Conservatory when I was 4.
Okay.
And I took some general music classes, enough for a 4-year-old to comprehend.
Okay.
And, I learned about percussion and string instruments and piano. So after that year was up, at the age of 5, we toured the conservatory, and we chose what instrument we wanted to, and we would sit in these master classes that were going on. So I really wanted to take piano.
Okay.
And my mom said no. And so she enrolled me in violin.
That is I mean, not to interrupt, like, that is an interesting thing, because I've heard the other story. Yeah. Like, I want to play this instrument. No, you have to play piano.
Yeah.
But, like, that was mine. Like, you have to play piano.
Yeah.
But, like, okay.
Well, I think for my mom, not really having a huge musical knowledge, she didn't understand that, a lot of people, you take some piano lessons before you branch out, but she had her heart set on violin. And so I studied violin from age 5 until I graduated from high school.
Did you start on a smaller instrument?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I competed. I was in a string quartet. And it was interesting, but I didn't really enjoy it. And so,
because it wasn't your first love, or because it wasn't what you wanted to be doing?
It just wasn't what I wanted to be doing. I wasn't passionate about it.
Yeah.
And so my grandmother, when I was 7, left the church that she was going to, which was a church I was born into, and she started going to Judson Baptist Church in Oak Park, where Pastor Jackson.
Pastor Jackson. We know Pastor J.
Yes. And so there was a guy there by the name of Merrill Dunlop who wrote the hymn "Only One Life to Offer."
Okay, that's why I know that name.
And the guy, I think Merrill died when he was like 93, 94 years old, but up until a few weeks before he died, this guy could play like Bach preludes and fugues on the organ flawlessly.
Incredible.
And this was the first time I'd ever heard a pipe organ, and I'd ever heard a hymn like opened a hymnal and read out of it. And at that time, I didn't know how to read a hymnal. I thought you just read each line.
Okay. I remember. Yeah, I remember that as well. Like, I'm not anywhere anybody else is right now. So far away.
Mr. Dunlop used to, I'd go up to him after church, and he would, tell me about the organ. And he was too old for, to take me up to the organ chest, but he would show me how to get up there.
Okay.
And so I just remember falling in love with this instrument. And then I went to middle school and high school in Timothy Christian in Elmhurst, and they had a pipe organ in their auditorium. And I was terrible. Had never taken lessons except for, Merrill showing me a few things. But just learning about this instrument from a guy who, I think he was 15 when he became the organist for Moody Bible Church. And, was the organist for many of Billy Graham's crusades. In fact, had gotten Billy Graham to come and preach at JBC.
Wow.
So there's just this host of knowledge and wisdom in this man. Wow. And so went to high school, just loved the organ, started playing at this Christian Reformed church in Elmhurst, just learning about the organ and trying to figure things out.
And where were you living at this time?
I was still living in Chicago, so I would travel. And the funny thing is, up until I was a sophomore in high school, I didn't know any of the notes on the keyboard. I couldn't tell you what note anything was. And so this girl basically took me to the piano one day and just told me each note. And I sat there and memorized every note on the piano.
Wow.
And so it was a wake-up call for me that I needed to be in music. I just didn't know how. And so during high school, I would stay at a friend's house on the weekends, and I'd go to Christ Church of Oakbrook with him. And there's a guy by the name of Nate Klinger, who was the worship leader for the 830 band, and sometimes you can see him doing the national anthem for like Cubs games. He'll take out his sax and stuff like that.
Okay.
And I just fell in love with church music. And during the sermon, because, you still can't comprehend sitting through a 40-minute sermon. So I'd get up to go to the bathroom, and I'd go, and this Christ Church is a huge campus. Yeah, it's massive. And I would always get lost and wind up not making it back for the end of service. But I was just playing violin. And I would go down to the music suite and hear 145 people rehearsing their anthem for the classical service.
That's amazing.
And Devon Hollingsworth was down there. And that moment triggered something special. And I just knew I was meant to worship God and to lead others in worship musically. And I didn't know how that was going to turn out. But Chicago and the west suburbs, outside of the power of the Holy Spirit, I owe to everything about myself. There's just such a unique musical history here, both classically, but also the church music history of Chicago and the western suburbs is so unique.
Yeah.
So unique. So
wow. So then formal training was what?
So I took theory and ear training in all the classes and as I was studying violin straight through high school. But becoming a keyboardist, training didn't happen until my first year of college.
Okay.
And I went to Pensacola Christian College, which was probably, sorry to anyone watching who loves that institution, it was probably the worst thing I ever did.
It's a little bit of a different culture than you probably were used to.
But I was thankful that I went.
Okay.
Because I went to no classes and just practiced for a year.
Wow.
That's all I did every day. And there was a professor there by the name of Pythagoras Gonsalves.
What a name.
Yeah. And he could play piano really well. He was a really strong organist. And he spent the year just kind of teaching me some things. And what he didn't do was tell me that I couldn't do it.
Love it.
I mean, I really struggled, learning just basic technique. And on top of that, I've gone straight from violin to the organ, still not having ever had a piano lesson. And so I spent that year studying with him organ. And knowing that I wasn't coming back that year, I didn't know where I was going to go to college.
Okay.
And I used to stay at this lady's house on the weekends, which was against school policy, but she was a friend of my grandmother's from Judson Baptist.
Okay.
And she'd make a cheesecake for me every weekend with a ginger snap crust.
Nothing wrong with that.
And it was fantastic. She lived in a golf course community, as everybody in Florida does.
They do. It's just one big golf course.
And so I remember going to church with her and playing in their worship band. And then I remember one Sunday, I just took off and went to another church in town. And they sang Zion's Walls. And Aaron Copland's Zion's Walls, but it was Glenn Copenhagen's arrangement.
Ha! I know where this is going.
And so I Googled Glenn Copenhagen, and Nyack College School of Music came up.
Yeah.
And it was not the first time I'd heard of Nyack.
Okay.
The first time I heard of Nyack was in high school. And we had a Christian college fair. And there's this really good-looking admissions counselor from San Diego Christian College. And all the guys went to talk to her.
Of course.
And I was the last to leave. And she's like, so what do you want to do with your life? And I told her, and her words to me was, our college just isn't good enough. But you should check out Nyack College. And I was like, you should probably lose your job. But so my mom had this dream of me going to New York. And I didn't want to go at first, but that year at Pensacola was a good year for me to really just live into learning the function of a keyboard and learning the organ. So that summer before I moved to Nyack, I spent an hour and a half on, I think, Wednesdays with Devon Hollingsworth studying organ. And then the next day, a guy from my high school, brother-in-law, was an organist at First Baptist Church in Oak Park, Reverend Nathan Lamayu. Huh. And I would go the next day for an hour and a half with him and study organ. And he would let me come anytime I wanted to, just to practice.
Sure.
There were days I was there till midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, just practicing.
So you would close up at night.
Yeah. And he was really what I felt the first organ professor that really believed that I could do something with it. And he was very realistic, but he saw the potential to be pretty good at it. And so he helped me that summer. He wanted me to do an organ recital. And I was like, I've only been studying organ for a couple months, and he helped me get some repertoire together. And I would say at least like 200 people from JBC showed up for my organ recital, and other people showed up. And it was really, I felt really accomplished, and just to see him proud. And so then I moved to New York, and found out that my organ teacher was going to be Craig Williams, who is the organist and choir master for West Point. Which
you really were sort of scraping the bottom of the barrel,
right?
There. You know, he was the last one who would pick up the phone,
right? And I sent him. I went to Christchurch to record my audition tape, and I recorded it on a floppy disk.
What? How? How do you even do that?
Because the organ at Christchurch, you could put a floppy disk in and record, and then I sent it to him. And I think Craig and Glenn Copeland pretty much went around trying to find a way to convert a floppy disk to an MP3 file and listen to it.
That's amazing.
And he accepted me into his organ program.
He probably never actually ever heard it. He probably just thought, this kid has so much gumption. He's in the program.
Probably. I wouldn't be surprised.
Hey, he had access to an organ with a floppy disk on it.
So, West Point is the largest all-pipe church organ in the world, and a house of worship. And I'll never forget my first semester. I was about a month into school. A buddy drove me to West Point for a lesson, and it was that moment I just was like, yeah, I've never heard an organ like this before.
Yeah.
And so I spent my years at NIAC focusing on organ. And I worked really hard, and I'm in the realm of organ. I remember, I can't think of what book it was, but it's by Harold Best, who was at Calvary Baptist and Wheaton College, and Harold Best basically said and if I can remember it correctly, he was basically kind of okay at things, but he was kind of a conduit for bringing other really talented musicians around him, and so I still to this day don't consider myself to be a prolific keyboardist, but all the work just to be able to go and at least present myself well. And so 3 years into NIAC, I injured my wrist playing handbells.
See, I mean, don't even. I know there's some people watching who appreciate the handbells, so I'm going to be very careful. But it just goes to show you.
Yeah. So we were on tour, and the girl who was supposed to help me in the low bass section didn't come, so I had nothing but low bells. And finally on tour, like, I just heard a snap, and I was like, oh, nope, there goes my career.
There goes your handbell career, for sure.
Yeah. So Copeland talked to NASM, National Association of School of Music, and they formed a conducting degree program for me.
Wow.
And that was when my focus shifted from church music to a professional conducting career. And so I went to Bard Conservatory for grad school, focusing on conducting, and and then singing kind of came later as well.
That's wild, because you would think by listening to you sing that, like, singing was just the first thing that happened? I mean, when I've heard you sing, it's mighty, and it's I would have put the order of operations completely differently. I mean,
Yeah.
it's astonishing to hear this.
Well, I think what took me a roundabout way was for me to figure that I think the things that I do with my physical body is really where my gifting is. And, I love playing keyboard. I love playing organ. I love playing the B3 whenever I can. And I'm grateful that I'm good at sight reading, because there are a lot of really phenomenal keyboards out there who can't sight read. Yeah. But kind of the natural things for me, the gifting things are using my hands and my voice. And it took me a long time to figure that out, but had I figured that out earlier, I don't know that I would be as strong of a musician.
Yeah.
So
you're currently serving at Venice Presbyterian in the great metropolis of Venice.
Venice, Florida, yes.
Is there a building above 6 stories in the city of Venice?
I don't even think so. I mean, everywhere you look, you can see the sky.
And you serve there as
Minister of Music and Worship.
Minister of Music and Worship. All the titles, everyone's title is different. We all do the same thing.
Yeah.
They should just call it Music Guy and just make it simple.
Well, R.C. Sproul's church, they're super biblical there.
Really?
So their guy is called the Chief Musician.
I've seen chief musician in Anglican churches quite a bit, chief musician.
Yeah.
I feel like I need to have a hat, or at least a pocket square that no one else has. And so you play the organ every Sunday. Do you play the piano every Sunday? Mm-hmm. You direct the choir. Now, is that a seasonal choir, or is that an?
It is. I like to say I have 3 choirs.
Okay.
And it's a very seasonal choir, as in usually between May and July I have 15.
Okay.
15 to 20. Usually between August and September I have 10.
Okay.
And then October through December, well, I should say the 3rd week of December, because then after that they all leave. Okay. October to the 3rd week of December I have about 35.
Okay.
And then January through Easter I have close to 60. So it really is, a lot of choral conductors, in churches, they try and make sure that, the choir has an established library of things that they can at least just pull out and spend some time working on.
Sure.
And that's the tough thing here is just, every year I kind of have to replan what I do, just because I have 3 different. My choir changes literally every 3 to 4 months. So it's a lot.
And the timbre of the choir. I mean,
exactly.
Everything. Not only the numbers, but the strengths and weaknesses are different. It's not like you had, the same sound. I mean, that's got to be a challenging thing, because then your rehearsal technique has to change, right?
It changes. The warm ups I do change. Sure. The tough thing is what winds up happening, basically the rehearsal technique you're changing is basically figuring out how to produce another choir for another 3 months, and how to produce a decent, I don't want to say a decent sound, but a good sound for that period of time. Sure. And so, with church music, you're constantly performing every week. And so it's not like you have okay, now I'm going to spend the next 3 weeks reworking this choir. It's kind of like, okay, we've got a week
to go.
And I mean, the sound builds over time. I think the frustrating thing sometimes is when, during that really low tide, the pastor will do a couple really good sermons, and you're just like, you have the perfect anthems, and it's like, no,
Yeah.
I need 60 people to do this.
Not saying the rest of your sermons aren't good.
No.
We're not going to edit that out, but let the record state he's not saying the rest of the year is a waste of time.
he's fantastic.
No, he is. I've deeply appreciated his ministry as well. No, I get it. Like, there have been times where I've been sitting in the sermon going, oh man, had you been able to give me a transcript of this?
Yeah.
I mean, the pastor I serve with now is really good about an outline and a general idea, and he's a musician, so he helps even shape some of the closing songs. But like, there are times when I look at it and I'm like, oh man, I would have gone this direction, or I would have gone that direction, or that would be so perfect. And you know, you probably experienced the same thing in terms of like, this anthem would have been amazing. Like, do this in 3 months when I got this group or whatever.
Yeah, it is tough. But same with you, it's great having a pastor who is a musician.
Yeah.
And, you know, one thing that's very different is he truly has made me the minister of music and worship. So I do a lot of the planning of liturgy.
That's great.
I choose a lot of our prayers of confessions, and so I kind of he'll usually give me an outline, not so much an outline, but a Excel sheet of what he's preaching on for a few months, the Bible passage, the title of the sermon. And so that really helps me. And it helps me in my devotional life too, just, you know, so that there's some continuity for me as to what I'm doing on a Sunday morning.
Well, rarely for us does church happen on Sunday morning. I mean, I don't know about you, but for me, I find that like I'm spending a lot of Sunday morning babysitting. You know, not to say that everyone's like babies, but like I've got so many things I'm keeping track of. And while yes, I'm finding myself worshiping, but like there's also church for me happens sometimes in the planning and going over this stuff and the prayers and confession and the liturgy and going through that. That's where I find church really happens for me, and hanging with people during the week and things like that. But Sunday morning can be
it is tough, and you know, it is tough to sit through the sermon sometimes, not because they're not good, but you know, you're finally sitting down,
right,
and you're just like pinching yourself. And so the thing that actually helps me, which the congregation is really getting used to, but in the black church, you know, you always talk back to your pastor while he's preaching.
Yeah.
And so that actually, just having the courage to do that in the situation in which I work, was scary, but that actually has helped me stay alert and engaged in the service. And then just kind of, you know, there are a few other churches out there who I can go and watch their live stream, and that's been really good. Now, after 100 years of ministry, Chuck Swindle has finally started live streaming his services.
Yeah.
And so
those are my buddies who are all in charge of that.
yeah. And so it's nice to just be able to leave church on Sunday and just listen to the service, listen to the music, and just listen to some preaching. So
that's cool. Yeah, their chief audio engineer is Jason Webb, one of my closest friends in all the world. Toured together for years, but he's taken over that audio ministry and is doing a good job. And he's going to be a future guest on this show. And you've been kind enough to bring Stephen Liner Group down there, and it's a beautiful space and a beautiful church, and what a highlight of our tour in January. So it's always good to work together.
No, it's great. It's great having you guys. You guys, the church always loves you, and it just, you know, none of our services ever look the same.
It's a beautiful thing,
and it's rare to be able to do that.
Oh, good.
Especially with a congregation of that age. You know,
continuity is important.
And so there's just this awesomeness of being able to I've kind of employed some of the I don't want to say tactics, but things that I've seen at West Side. When I was working at a specific church in New York City.
Yeah.
Calvary Baptist, I'll just say it.
I grew up in that church. That's all right.
It was a very dark time for me. A place where there just wasn't a lot of spiritual growth for me. And so just being able to go to, if I had the time to just pop up to the West Side and go, and there were a few times I was lucky to hear Tim Keller speak. But that's always what did it for me when I was working there. And either that or, when I would clean out the music, it happened every single time I'd clean out the music library, I'd always find a Paul Liljestrand hymn reharmonization.
And for those of you for whom that name is unfamiliar, Paul Liljestrand and his wife Ray were very close friends of my family growing up. My brother studied piano and organ with him. I studied piano with his wife Ray, who's probably watching this. She's a very big supporter of the things that I'm doing. But awesome. I really only went because she would make me Belgian waffles after every lesson, and so I would completely fudge through. And she knew that I just was never going to get past Indian Song on the piano, and so it was a complete waste of my parents' money. But it was a special time, and he was the organist, choir director at Calvary, and played my brother's wedding, one of the last things he did.
Wow.
Flew up to Chicago to play
awesome.
Ben's wedding, and so Paul Liljestrand is in many hymnals and has impacted the world in a lot of ways. No one modulates, and the reason I actually there's a reason I found you mid-service. So Stephen Liner Group was at Calvary several years ago, and I was back in that little hallway, sort of wandering around the hallways I did as a tiny boy, because I was on the camera ministry there and ran audio and did all kinds of things back in the day. So I was just walking up down, seeing the same placards on the walls, and I heard this modulation in the middle of a hymn, and I'm like, I know from where that has come from. And that is, no one learns to modulate like that unless you've spent some time in Nyack and you've studied Paul Liljestrand and Tammy Lum and some of these great minds of music, and reached out to you, probably, I think, on Facebook Messenger. I'm like, dude, I'm downstairs. Obviously you didn't write back at that moment, but I have to tell somebody that I know exactly what you're doing right now. And so
now there is a there's a legacy at Calvary, and I think that's a tough thing that makes it hard for me to relate to younger Christians now, because that's not as important to them.
Right.
But, I sat in the loft of Harold Best. I have sat in the loft of Paul Liljestrand. I have sat in the loft of Craig Williams. And so, for me, you can ask my now wife, who was my girlfriend at the last year of my ministry there. She remembers me picking her up from her apartment in Jersey and taking her to New York City because I had to practice. I had to be somewhat up to snuff for Sunday mornings. And I will never forget, I'd been at Calvary for a few years, and unfortunate situation had happened that the music director had left or had to leave. And my very first Sunday kind of taking over, I had a brass quintet there. So I had to, I was working remotely, and I had to pick out music so that I wanted to look good for them. And the choir director wasn't there, so I had to conduct choir that Sunday. And Dr. Hubbard is preaching.
Other than that, it was a pretty low-key, normal Sunday.
And so,
wow.
the funny thing was, I'm sitting there at the prelude, and I'd asked for months for the deacons to get me a mirror, and they had to have a meeting about getting me an organ mirror. And finally, I just got a little cosmetic mirror and said, to heck with it.
Yeah.
And I'm looking in the mirror, and there's maybe a couple hundred people there. Choir comes out, and I had a few extra choir members that morning because of Dr. Hubbard. And I go into the first hymn, and people are just singing like I had not heard them sing ever.
Wow.
And I turn around to the first hymn, and the place is packed.
What happened?
And all of a sudden, my hands are shaking. I'm just like, and Dr. Hubbard came to me after worship, and I literally almost cried. And he said to me, he's like, that takes me back to my years at Calvary Baptist.
Yes.
And I was like, man, that's
yeah.
that was really a blessing to hear.
I mean, we arrived sort of as he was finishing his last couple years there. Mom was a choir director, and I just remember lots of memories in the Regency room and hearing Paul practice, and that's a special thing. That's a real special thing for him to say.
Yeah.
And it's high praise. And so you're also now let's see, you did Elijah recently.
Yes. So that is a role that I studied a little bit in undergrad. I'd taken a few about a year of voice lessons in undergrad, but wasn't very serious about it. And so when I got to grad school, I had the privilege of taking a year of voice with a tenor there who was one of John Elliott Gardner's main tenors for his passions. And
you always find these real bottom of the barrel folks.
I know, right? And he worked on some things with me, and then I moved to Florida, and I met the conductor of Key Chorale, which is a really phenomenal group, and started making some connections with Sarasota Orchestra. And I asked him, I was like, have you ever thought about doing Elijah? And he's like, at some point. And so he was looking for a baritone section leader for the bass section, and I went auditioned and sang like 4 arias from Elijah.
Like I said, have you ever thought about doing Elijah?
So he came to my house, because we have these Thursday night it's 3 of us that just get and we just eat food galore and have a little vodka.
Nothing wrong with that.
And we usually hang out till like 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning.
Wow.
And he said, we're going to do Elijah. And I was like,
Pre-vodka or post-vodka?
all the vodka.
Great.
And he's like, we're gonna do Elijah next year. And I was very happy, but I knew the severity of how big of a role this was, and the level that the chorus and the orchestra would be performing at. And so me and Jenna, my wife, by the way, prayed and prayed and prayed that I would find a voice teacher. So I'm sitting at this new members kind of, it's a little luncheon to welcome new members or people who are interested in joining the church. And sitting behind me is this guy with just the lowest, most delicious, milky voice
Mellifluous.
ever. And everybody's going around introducing themselves. He's like, "Oh, my name is Kenneth Cox." I can't even speak that low. I mean, the dude was a basso profundo. Wow. He said, "My name's Kenneth Cox." He's like, I taught voice and opera, and conducted a church choir. And so I was like, man, that name sounds familiar, but I don't know. So I went and Googled this guy. I was like, holy junk. This dude has sung opera all over the world, and every major opera house is like the head of a huge opera program in Colorado. And I was like, okay. Yeah. So, I talked to Jenna. I was like, this is going to be expensive. I was like, someone of this level, probably going to be a couple $100. And got to his house on the first day of lesson. I was like, how much? He's like, oh, don't worry about it. And then 4 months go by, and I never had to pay him a dime. And he prepared me for Elijah rigorously.
How often were your lessons?
Every week.
Okay.
Every week at his house.
So you were putting together church services. You were planning, doing all of that in addition to practicing a colossus of a role.
Yeah.
How did you balance that?
I didn't.
Okay. Were you in the hospital?
Well, on top of that, I was preparing to conduct the Beethoven Emperor Concerto and the Gershwin Rhapsody in Blue.
You bring this upon yourself.
Exactly, which what musician doesn't? But I was sick a lot, and stressed out a lot, and the thing that I've learned is you can't put all your eggs in like 50 different baskets.
Right.
It's like you need to.
You don't need to put them all in one basket.
Exactly.
They're all wrong.
But I had no choice.
Yeah.
I had no choice, but I will say the week of Elijah, my church was very good about saying, don't come to work, rest, work from home. I'd come in for a meeting or two there as needed, but I slept, I rested, and yeah, but that was a huge, and I mean that was all in the span of 3 months, and got married in November 24th. Went on our honeymoon, but we had to make a pit stop to do a Messiah in New York.
Of course.
Which the day before I had to do a Messiah in Florida.
You really know how to treat a girl, man.
Right? So then we went to our honeymoon in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
And learned some things about marriage there that my wife doesn't particularly like to go to a museum 8 hours a day as I do.
Doesn't.
No.
You learned that. Okay.
I did learn that.
Did you learn it by asking her, or did you learn by taking her there and experiencing that?
Learned by experiencing the calamity of anger that can come from your wife when you subject her to 8 hours a day of seeing museums. And there were some things we did. So finally, I took her to a spa and we got some mani-pedis done.
Good.
But it was a great time just to be away.
Yeah.
So then we come back from our honeymoon, we live together for about 3 days, and then I ship off to Massachusetts to do a Beethoven Mass in C. And so I would say the first 2 months of our marriage, we were together for maybe two weeks.
She is a mighty, mighty wonderful woman.
Yes, she is. So yeah, it was a lot.
So when I've done a lot of pit orchestras. I've played a lot of musicals, Broadway shows, things like that. When the run is done, there's just sort of a vacuum that takes place. You miss all this prep and then these shows, and you have the applause, you have the sound of the crowd, you have all of this sound happening around you that audience members don't necessarily have. Did you experience a low like that when this run of craziness and insanity was done? Obviously, it's amazing to get back to your marriage, but like, was there a musical low for you?
Yeah. You know, there are a lot of church musicians out there that all they do is live, breathe, and eat their church music. And for some people, you know, if you're at St. Thomas in New York City or St. Pat's or St. John the Divine,
That's it.
That the level
Right.
of musicianship allows you to be like,
Sure.
yeah, this is fantastic.
Right.
But when you are working in the context of a regular church, where your choir is 100% amateur singers,
Right.
You're able to, you're stressed, but you're excited because you've got all these musical outlets going on professionally, and you're still somehow able. For me, it encourages me to be happy and joyful and give that to my choir. It's when it stops that honestly some depression sets
Absolutely.
in, and that, you know, it's just like,
It's hard to explain to people sometimes.
yeah, it's, you know, it's like, I wish I could be doing this all the time, but
And it's not like the rest of the things in your life aren't good.
mm-hmm.
They're just not that, and that's okay.
Yeah.
The music isn't your marriage.
Yeah.
Your marriage isn't the music. So
Yeah.
that is all okay, but it still doesn't take away from the fact that there's a low.
Yeah.
So here's a question. To date, of all the concerts that you have performed, if you could only have one on record, if you were only allowed to have performed one concert and said, "Hi everybody, this is the one concert I've performed," what would it be? And you're not going to offend anyone. This is not like, you know, belittling someone else that didn't make the cut. But what's one concert?
It's really difficult, especially when you have two performing mediums.
It is. I might be able to make an exception. I'll run it by the committee, the same committee that met for the.
No, I want to take the challenge.
Okay.
There was something special, especially the fact that Elijah and many of the people, musician friends of mine, professional musician friends of mine who heard Elijah or have heard me sing arias from Elijah have also always said that's the role written for you. And to be able to perform it as a Christian is a whole nother level.
Yeah.
Because you yourself you can identify your wrestling with God just like Elijah, and just the inner turmoil of the fact that he just couldn't get these people, God's people,
Right.
to throw down the altar.
Right.
So that was an incredible experience, but I would say with my college chorus, my undergraduate chorus, and hiring 30 professional singers to come and supplement as well, and having some friends from the Met, the New York Phil, and other great musicians in New York City conducting Beethoven 9.
Wow.
If there is one moment that I could just relive over and over and over again for the rest of my life, it would be conducting Beethoven 9.
Yeah.
Because there are some amazing, talented conductors who will go to their grave having never conducted
That's a very true statement.
a Beethoven 9.
That's a very true statement.
And so I think just because of that, and I mean, I was 24 at the time I did it. And we were planning to do scenes from Verdi's Aida because I really love opera. But that didn't happen. And so I gave my chorus teacher like a list of like 80 possible choral orchestral pieces we could do, with Beethoven 9 being on the very bottom of the list. And I would only have 3 months to prepare. And he's like, yeah, we're going to do Beethoven 9.
Wow.
And I was like, and at the time I was going to grad school, and, you know, I really started floundering in my classes because, you know, my grad school was an hour and a half drive every day. And so sometimes I would leave early to get home so I could have some level of awakeness to be able to study.
Yeah.
There were times I didn't leave grad school until 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. So to make the drive home after having gotten there at 8 in the morning, I knew if I had kept going, I probably would have crashed. So there were some nights I slept in a rest area and would go into McDonald's in the rest area, get a cup of coffee and some fries, and sit in my car and study Beethoven and drive back to grad school having not put on deodorant or showered or brushed my teeth. And that happened, I want to say, almost once or twice a week for 3 months.
Aside from the fries, you sort of lived like Beethoven probably lived.
Yeah.
Coffee, no deodorant, very little sleep.
Yeah. So yeah, I would say conducting the Beethoven 9 will always be, until the Lord gives me opportunity to conduct Mahler's 8th Symphony.
8.
Mahler's 8th Symphony.
Really?
Yeah, that is I would say Beethoven 7,
Yeah.
Beethoven 3,
Yeah.
Beethoven 9, all of Beethoven's Piano Concerti, and Mahler's 8th Symphony and Verdi's Requiem, with Mahler 8 being on the top of my list of favorite pieces.
Yeah.
It's like, what other symphony out there has every musical instrument known to man involved in it, you know?
Yeah. So that answer sort of answers the next specific question. If you were only allowed to have performed one specific piece of music, it would have been Beethoven 9. So that concert and that piece, that's sort of the pinnacle thus far.
Yeah.
That's thus far for you. When people listen to you play or they see you perform, what are you wanting them to see? Are you wanting to convey anything to them? What do you want them to see? What do you want them to experience?
In a secular atmosphere, I'm wanting, if I'm playing, I'm wanting them to feel a varied of emotions, but I'm wanting them to go on a journey from start to finish. When I did Elijah, some people who weren't Christians, and I know aren't Christians, came to me and they're like, you know, the most transcendent thing about the performance was the fact that we could feel you believed every word that came out of your mouth. And I was like, that's it.
That's it.
That's it.
That's why we just did this.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's a great feeling. All right, you get in the car by yourself. You've got maybe an hour or less drive ahead of you. Do you have a go-to musical search? That if anyone were attached to your hip, they'd go like, dude, all right, every single time we're in the car, we listen to this. Or that we listen to this so often. Do you have a go-to search, whether it's a YouTube thing, a Spotify thing, an iTunes thing, that like you do that with great regularity more than anything else?
Yes, I have. So my wife hates it very, very much, but most human beings have like a regular alarm.
Okay.
My alarm is Dixit Dominus by Handel.
Such a nerd. Wow, you are such a nerd. Amazing.
So the adventure starts there.
Boy, she is an amazing woman.
She is. So when I get in the car, there is the Get Up and Go playlist.
Okay.
And it starts with Tower of Power.
Yeah.
Goes to George Clinton in Parliament.
Whoa.
Goes to the most loud, exuberant black gospel music.
Okay.
And ends with Earth, Wind, and Fire.
This is a magical playlist.
It is.
Is this a Spotify playlist?
This is a playlist I made on my iTunes.
Wow.
And so, I mean, it's a super, like, awkward playlist. It's like everything possible.
I love it, though.
But I just love funk. Yeah. There's just, and bass is the one instrument I always wanted to learn. And I never could. Yeah. I could never even learn guitar.
Right.
But there's just something about funk that if, contemporary Christian music is hard for me to get into. Yeah. But if all Christian music sounded like Tower of Power, like if every church has had a blowing brass section, man. And I mean, just rock that would be that I would give up. Yeah. I'd give up organ music and just be like, I'll do this for the rest of my life.
Love it. I'm right there with you. I've chosen restaurants based on the kind of music that they play. And you're familiar with Papado. So the Papado here in the Chicago suburbs, it's just a funk playlist. I mean, it's awesome. You're just there just destroying soft-shell crab after soft-shell crab, and you've got, like, good old-school funk, and it's like, open up a window. It's so funky in here. Love it. I love it. Yeah. Like you go from you wake up to Handle, and then you drive to Parliament. Yeah. Hip. Final question. So, you're navigating a church world and a freelance world. As a church music director, do you choose your freelance work that might complement your role as a church music director, or do you want to choose your freelance work that contrasts it? Or do you think that? Do you think about it?
I do. I would like to do both. A good friend of mine from Nyack and his parents still are part of the Navigators, and they lived in Queens. Steve Tice is his father's name. Okay. And there's just this sound. It's kind of like if like Rory Nolan and Andre Crouch had a love child musically. Yeah. That's kind of the sound, I don't know, that reminds me of kind of the Navigator ministry musically, and I just loved his dad's worship leading. He just had this voice. Yeah. And I want to be able to use my platform to travel to encourage other Christians. This last month, I had been really praying on coming up with a vision statement for the Worship and Arts program in Venice. And basically, my vision statement was to use music as a means to exalt God and to point the believer and the non-believer to the cross. And I find that when I'm singing, I'll be going to do another Elijah in Massachusetts next year, which I'm excited about. Wow. that's my platform to witness. And I'm thankful that God gifted me to be able to do that role of Elijah, because I can finally have a way of expressing Christ and God through that means. But I do like to have gigs that compete as well, because I feel like that's the only way to keep my chops up. So, I mean, next year I'll be doing some gigs that kind of compete, but I'll be going to Spruce Lake Camp for a week to do some worship for them. And so I like to be able to do it all. It's just very difficult to try and do it all. And one of the great things about my church is we have our concert series. And they definitely let me spend good money on our concert series, so I can keep my conducting chops up with doing a lot of the repertoire that I get to do as a conductor, and bringing in guest musicians like the Stephen Liner group. We had Canadian Brass this year.
Some heavies on that concert list.
And I had King's Brass for Easter this year.
That's right. That's a big sound.
Yeah.
It's a big sound.
And it was in that situation, when I was in New York City, no one ever complained that the organ was too loud. But in Venice, everyone's like, oh my gosh, the organ's just so loud. And Tim was just like, yeah, man, we're burying you. You got to play out. And I mean, it got to the point where like the whole chancel was shaking from the organ.
That's a beautiful new instrument to have shaken, man.
And this much is coming out over the brass still.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'm very blessed and fortunate to be in the ministry context.
Yeah.
I'm blessed to be able to preach, and just to have connections. Dr. Neely at Moody with Pastor Jay. Just some really strong men of God who've really impacted my life. I'm blessed. Yeah, it's difficult. Ministry is difficult, and it's always been said that people choose a church based on the preaching and the music, and I still find that to be true. Yeah. But people can be miserable. And if there's anything that I've learned, as great as my church is, there are still always those people who just look to find you immediately after service to just cut you down. Yep. And it kind of makes you not want to do it.
Yeah, I used to get anonymous notes left at the piano.
Yeah.
It's tough.
But I'm in this place in life right now where I have no idea what God wants me to do. And there are these kind of dark holes that I kind of get into and just want to be left alone. Because I feel like I'm still trying to figure out my identity, both in Christ, but also in my career. And the tough thing about having been varied in all these musical things in education is it's been great, but it's also limited me from being great at one thing. And so I think that's kind of where I am. I still feel like I'm young enough to become great at one thing, but hopefully I'll figure that out.
In the last 60 seconds, what would you tell a young Jamal? If you were a young person who is sort of writing some of these lines, like, do I want to do church music? Do I want to do non-church music? I'm discouraged. What would you tell a younger person to encourage them?
I would definitely encourage them to be in silence and solitude and really listen for the voice of God, But I would encourage them as a musician to take every possible chance, do everything.
Yeah.
You know, create discipline and always look to be as, you know, I feel it's important that the best musicians are in the church. But always work hard on your craft. But take every advantage and be patient. Because that's the one thing is if you aren't patient, you'll walk through some doors you weren't meant to walk through. And it'll make you a better person, but you've got to elongate the process of what God's wanting to do with you. So patience, discipline, and taking every possible advantage of everything you can. So,
all right. What an honor to have you on.
Thank you.
Thanks for taking the time, man. I feel like it's a privilege. I got you when you were home for a couple of days, and I can't wait for people to hear this and to hear your story, and I can't wait to see what's next. And
well, it's an honor and privilege to be here with you.
Thanks for the time.